Welcome to This Late Hour, a look at the world through the lens of Scripture. I'm your host, Kasey Knowlton.
Well, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. The time has finally come. We're going into the book of Revelation. Yes, we're doing it. And when I say we, I mean we, for I am not alone today. I'm actually with, yes, my wife, Mandy, is joining me today on the podcast. Hello.
Hi.
So my favorite person is joining me, and we're going to be talking about something very important today. We're going to be talking about not only Revelation 6, but also the Olivet discourse, Matthew 24, a bunch of that, where Jesus is asked about the end by his disciples, and he gives an answer concerning the destruction of the temple, but also going into what we believe is in alignment with what is talked about in Revelation and even in parts of Daniel, which we won't get into today, because there's just too many things. But we did want to get here because here's the challenge with prophecy. As we're approaching the scriptures, we want to have a proper exegesis. I've talked about this before, where we're not bringing our own interpretation into the text or trying to have it kind of say what we think it says because we hold to some preconceived idea. We want to just let the text speak for itself and then compare it to other places within itself. So we're comparing the Bible to itself and making sure we have the best sort of interpretation we can get. But with prophecy, a lot of it is some things that have not happened yet. So we're called to be watchful. So there's this idea of we're seeing things, and we're making observations and we're making judgments about it. So we're walking this kind of weird place in the middle where we don't want to bring in our own interpretation, but we also want to watch what's going on. So this is the tension we're in right now. Right?
That's right. And there might be a question of, well, why are we talking about Revelation now? People have been talking about Revelation for a long time. Oh, the end is near. You get those crazy people that are all, they're always seeing prophecy everywhere. So what's the deal? Why would we say, well, now we would turn to the book of Revelation?
Some people might say we're a little crazy too, just to be fair.
Well, they'd probably be right about that. But, why would we say that we're...
Why are we saying we need to be paying attention to it now? What's the difference between now and every other time? Of course, that's what I've been dealing with these first two seasons so far. And one of the main issues is what is stated in Matthew 24:14, I believe. This is what Douglas Cobb talked about in the episode I did with him. You would be well advised to go back and listen to that. I think it's the second episode of this season. But that Jesus states, the gospel of the kingdom shall go out to every nation, and then the end shall come. Now, based on every metric we understand from the missionary community, and there were kind of three different points of an end point, we should say, given. This is something that Rick Warren had put out some number of years ago, but basically saying, okay, have we reached every unreached group with the gospel and seen some conversions? Do we have the Bible translated in some fashion to some degree in every language? And is there a church in every place in the world in some degree? So these are kind of the metrics that the missionary community uses. And so all three of those are extraordinarily close. The first, having conversions, people converted from every tribe, tongue, and nation, throughout the earth, that goal post is very close. And I think the last time I heard an update from Doug Cobb, we were in the just barely over 100. Maybe 115, something like that. I mean, and a lot of them were
115 what?
Unreached groups.
Oh, that are left?
That are left.
Oh, nice.
And so a bunch were in China, and some were in Brazil, and some other places as well. But China's tricky, of course, for many reasons. I don't need to really explain. But so we know that's close. We know the Bible translations are close. I don't know exactly how close, but it was in the next several years they had hoped to have, some Bible translated in every language for every people group. And then, of course, the church, having churches in all the areas, that's a little harder to measure. But my understanding is some of the big church planting ministries, were coming to kind of a precipice of massive church plants sprouting up throughout the world. So anyway, however you want to look at it, we are close. If we're looking at that statement literally and taking Jesus at his word, okay, once we're at that point, that's when the end begins. And so that's why we're talking about it now, because that's what is being talked about in the missionary community and among many other Christian teachers and authors. In fact, the book I recommended, one of the last podcasts from John Eldredge, Resilient, I believe it's called, or Resilient, something like that. He notes in there as well, he is in agreement that he thinks we're in the time of the 10 bridesmaids, which is Matthew 25, where they're all out, waiting for the bride to come and have their lamps lit. And there's the ones who were wise and had enough oil, and the ones that were foolish and were left behind because they missed his coming.
Yep. So our closeness to the fulfillment of the Great Commission should prompt us to be watching for the signs of the end of the age. So I'm not looking for them like a crazy person, but I'm looking for them like the 10 virgins would be. Right. I'm being watchful. And no offense to people maybe in the past who were like, oh, the end is near. The disciples said the end was near. The end has been near for a while.
Right.
So maybe they were in the last days, maybe we're in the last seconds, as other people have said. Yes. But there's reason to be watching for it now. But when we get to Revelation, I've always kind of thought, well, Revelation is just too difficult or mysterious for us to understand. Leaving.
It's one of the reasons I've avoided talking about it a lot, because I don't want to get it wrong. But we have to look at it because that's what we're called to do, right?
Yep. And our pastor actually talked about the beginning of Revelation back on Easter Sunday, and it's his fault that I started looking more into Revelation. If you've got your Bible out, if you could look at Revelation chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, and we'll read it.
Yeah, we're gonna be in the scriptures quite a bit this episode, just comparing a lot of stuff from Revelation to Matthew, and just going through many of these points, and then also making observations about things we see going on in the world.
Yep. So this would be a good time to get your Bible.
So Revelation 1 through 3, this is what it says. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his bondservants the things which must soon take place, and he sent and communicated it by his angel to his bondservant John, who testified to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. Blessed is he who reads, and those who hear the words of the prophecy and heed the things which are written in it, for the time is near.
That's pointing out that not only are we blessed if we hear it and read it, but if we take it to heart. Or what did your version say?
We heed the things, H-E-E-D. We heed the things which are written in it, for the time is near.
Right. So there's a blessing in store for us if we are taking those to heart, or to heeding the message that's there. So we're supposed to try to read and understand it. It's not just supposed to be mysterious and left for just the experts alone.
Yes, I think we have outsourced a lot of our understanding and view of Revelation and prophecy to what we call the quote-unquote experts. Now, of course, there are going to be experts in their fields, which we should, be very thankful for. People who have given, many hours and many days laboring, understanding different texts and scriptures and interpretation methods. Of course, we don't want to make light of that. But Mandy's point here is that all of us are meant to read this and take heed. And it was given to the church, not to the experts.
Right. Something I noticed in Matthew 24:42, and then again in Matthew 25:13, Jesus commands us. He says, "Therefore keep watch." But it's a command for all the people who hear him. He did not say, "Now go and designate the smartest people to keep watch and check in with them from time to time."
Mm-hmm.
You know, he didn't say that.
Yeah, this is like my first episode from season 1. The entire emphasis of that episode was watching and waiting.
Yeah.
2 things we're called to do and to do well.
Right. So we should all be keeping watch like that. And that means that the material that was recorded in the Bible should be able to be understood by ordinary people through the power of the Holy Spirit. And of course, some good studious effort on our part. I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm just going to read Revelation or read another passage and be like, "Oh, I understand it immediately." I might have to work at it, but it doesn't mean that I can't understand it. I can understand it. I might need to work at it a little bit.
Yeah, we're definitely no experts, but one thing I can say is we talk about this stuff all the time, because every time we turn around, we see something and goes, man, if it's not the end, then why not? That's really bad, because every news article, every crazy thing that's going on in the world, every time we turn around, there's something. And so much of it has been reminding us of a lot of the stuff in Revelation 6, which is one of the reasons we wanted to go there, because, well, we have some thoughts about it.
Right. So many people have different opinions about Revelation.
No.
No
one has a different opinion about Revelation. We're all on the same page in the church about Revelation.
Right. Totally.
Totally.
My question was, when I was going through this a couple months ago, was what would happen if I just set my assumptions aside and just read the text for what it said? What conclusion would I maybe come to? So, for all of you, let's see if we could do the same. Let's just read the text for what it says and see what observations come out. And we want to see how Matthew 24 and Revelation 6 are related, because there's some cool stuff there.
Yeah, David and I talked about this in a bonus episode that part of it was released during season 1, and just some of the frustration I had because everyone wants to always tie these 2 things together, and I think there's good reason for that, because they seem to be talking about the same thing, and we're going to talk about why as we get into it.
In Matthew 24, the disciples are asking Jesus 3 separate questions. They're asking him, when will the temple be destroyed? Because he was just talking about that. They were walking around, and they were like, "Hey, look at the buildings, Jesus." And he's like, "Oh, hey, these are all going to be thrown down and destroyed."
Yeah, not one stone will be left on another. And of course, if you go to Jerusalem, the only thing that's left is the foundation wall. None of the actual temple is left. It's been all totally decimated. Right.
So anyways, but they were like, "Hey, look at the fancy buildings." And Jesus says to them, they're like, "What?" So anyway, so they're asking, when will the temple be destroyed? Because they wanted some clarity on that. And then, what will be the sign of your coming, and what will be the sign of the end of the age? Because it's my understanding that in their mind, that was all 3 going to happen at the same time.
Whoops.
Yeah, not quite, guys. But I could understand why they would think that.
Well, let me clarify this, that, because this is one of the kind of arguments. Well, the disciples thought it was the end, and it wasn't, so we don't want to be like them. And I need to clarify something, and this is something I've already talked about in prior episodes. We are in the last days, and we've been in the last days since the disciples' time. And this is all headed toward a conclusion. So they weren't wrong. They didn't understand how long it was going to be. That's why he always says, you don't know the day or hour. It's not for you to know the epochs or times and so forth. Not because we're not meant to watch and look for the signs. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Matthew 24 and we wouldn't have Revelation. It's because if he gave us a day, we'd all just obsess about it. And
we wouldn't do anything until it got
here. That's right.
Here.
Well, we just he's coming on this day. We're all waiting till that day comes. And we would be like the unfaithful servant in the parable of the talents, where he buries it in the ground and gives it back, and he says, "You wicked and unfaithful servant," because he didn't invest it. So, we're meant to be at work for the kingdom, and we're also meant to be watching for his coming, which is something he commands us to do, as we already mentioned.
Jesus, of course, gives the disciples a long answer, and
regarding the temple being destroyed, the sign of his coming,
yep.
And the end of the age.
Yep, and we'll read part of it. So you want to go ahead and read Matthew 24, verses 3 through 14?
As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us when these things will happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age." And Jesus answered and said to them, "See to it that no one misleads you, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will mislead many. You will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes, but all these are merely the beginning of birth pangs. Then they will deliver you to tribulation, and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. At that time many will fall away, and will betray one another, and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise, and will mislead many, because lawlessness is increased. Most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come."
So that's part of his answer. And then in verses 15 through 28, because we're not going to read the entire thing, he refers to many other terrible things. Some of them seem like they refer to the destruction of the temple. Others seem like they might be about to the end of the age, and some parts may refer to both events.
Yeah, and we've talked about this on the podcast previously.
Right.
David and I talked about patterns that we've seen throughout history with the abomination of desolation. That's what he's talking about there.
Right. So really, we're just reading this to set up Revelation 6 and the connections here.
Yes.
So can you read verses 29 and 31?
All right, if we jump over to 29 through 31, here's what it says. This is Jesus speaking. "But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other." Now that would be what many would call the rapture, when Christ gathers the believers, the faithful, the elect to himself. So we all get, beamed up, if you will, up into the sky, ascend as he did.
Mm-hmm. So there seems to be what most people, that have been in church for a while would think of. There's these wars and rumors of wars. There's terrible things going on. La-di-da-di-da. There's a big earthquake, and then we get taken up. Great, we get out of here. Fantastic. But what I noticed is that this passage, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light. That whole section right there sounds very familiar. And if you're familiar with Revelation 6, that will sound exactly like what's there. Mm-hmm. What's found there. Mm-hmm. So now that we've read this and reminded us all of what's here, maybe we could go over to Revelation 6 and see what's over there, and then talk about some current event stuff. So in Revelation 6, if we're getting there, the context of this is you have chapter 1 of Revelation, which explains that John is receiving a vision from Jesus. Chapters 2 through 3 are the letters to the churches. In chapter 4, John has a vision of the throne of heaven, and God is there, and he's surrounded by 24 elders and the living creatures, but no one else is there. So it's just a vision of God and these other heavenly beings, but nobody else is there in heaven. Mm-hmm. And then in chapter 5, there's a scroll with 7 seals. This is the same scroll that shows up in chapter 6.
This is where many scholars and experts would say, okay, this is the beginning of the tribulation.
Yeah.
Which, like the beginning of the end, the beginning of the sorrows, the beginning of all the bad things.
Yeah. So in chapter 5, there's this scroll that is there, and it has 7 seals on it. Now, my wonderful study Bible informed me that 7 seals means that... hang on, let me read it. In my study Bible, it says the scroll being sealed with 7 seals meant that it indicated it had absolute
inviolability. Like violate, inviolability.
it couldn't be changed. It means it couldn't be changed. So, my study Bible says that when it was sealed with 7 seals, that meant that it absolutely could not be changed whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So, that was the significance of it having 7 seals, and it gave some other examples in the Bible of when that kind of thing was used. So I'm relying on an expert for that one. Yay! Anyway, in chapter 5, the scroll shows up with the 7 seals. The chapter 5 says, "No one in heaven, on earth, or under the earth is found who is worthy to open it until Jesus comes. Because of his sacrifice, that he is worthy to open the scroll." Of course, because of his sacrificial death for our sins and all of that,
and conquering the grave.
Yep. Then he's worthy to open the scroll. I've heard some people say this is the title deed to the earth. Other people saying this is just the directions for judgment. Whatever the Bible doesn't explain what the scroll is. It just, all we know that when the scroll is opened, that's when all of the judgment and things begin. All the really terrible things happen. So opening the scroll is a big deal. At this time, in addition to the elders, the living creatures and God, thousands and thousands of angels are also present in heaven, but no one else is there. That's still really important. Mm-hmm. So then we get to Revelation 6 itself.
And the reason we're diving into this specifically, well, one, all the stuff here in Revelation 6 we believe correlates with what we just read to you from Matthew 24 when Jesus was speaking to his disciples. But secondly, we're convinced we may be entering or about to enter the period of the 7 seals. I know that's like, well, wait a minute, that can't be. Well, maybe not, but maybe so. And we're going to tell you why. Yep.
Just, if you've always heard about, we're going to have a pre-trib rapture, which is what I had always really thought would be the case, just hang on. Just hang with us for a little bit and see what you think here at the end. We'd be interested to hear what you think. And so we'll go ahead and read the whole thing, and then we'll come back and make some observations about the text.
Right. So if you have a Bible or a Bible app on your phone, it might be worth reading along. And this is an ESV translation. Actually, no, this is an NASB, excuse me. This is the 95 NASB. Revelation 6. Then I saw when a lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying as with a voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. When he broke the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature saying, "Come." And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and the men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. When he broke the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard something like the voice in the center of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine." When the Lamb broke the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a 1/4 of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. When the Lamb broke the 5th seal, I saw underneath the altar of souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God, and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. I looked when he broke the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, And the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, and the rich, and the strong, and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks and the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?
First, I want to point out the similarity that's there between Matthew 24 and Revelation 6. When it says in verse 14 of Revelation 6, the sky receded like a scroll, rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place, and it's talking about this earthquake. That's like the exact same wording that it's using in Matthew 24. Exactly the same. This thing, it also talks about in this chapter 6 here about the moon turning red, the stars of the sky falling to the earth. It's the same wording. And in Matthew 24, what we see is Jesus says that, the sun will be dark and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then his angels will send out this trumpet call, and he'll gather his elect from the four winds. So what it seems like is that there's this earthquake event thing. And then what sounds like the rapture happens, at least in Matthew 24. Mm-hmm. Well, if you keep going after Revelation 6, that chapter ends there. Chapter 7 is about the 144,000 being sealed.
That's chapter 7.
Well, it says that they're sealed, but then also in chapter 7, it says there's all these people in white robes that show up all of a sudden.
Verse 9 in chapter 7 says, After these things, after the sealing of all the Jews who are to be saved, I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands, and they cry out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb.
Yep, and a little farther down, it's in verse 13, or one of the elders is asking, hey, where'd these guys come from? And John's like, well, hey, sir, you know. And the elder answers him, These are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white before the blood of the Lamb. So we're pointing this out, and because in the previous chapters of Revelation, all that John is seeing in his vision is, heavenly creatures in heaven. He's seeing the elders, he's seeing the living creatures, he's seeing angels. And it mentions the prayers of the saints, but it doesn't. But no saints are there. It's pretty specific about that. Mm-hmm. And then you have the seals, and then after this sixth seal, then suddenly this great multitude shows up in chapter 7 in white robes, and it says they were taken out of the great tribulation. And you go, wait, what? And then if I go back to Matthew 24. Mm-hmm. Where it's using that exact same language to describe what's going on, with the sun being darkened, the moon will not give its light. It says at that time the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and he will gather his elect from the four winds. To me, that's sounding very much like the rapture, and it's occurring in both Matthew 24 and Revelation 6 in the same order. In the same place. It's before the seventh seal is opened. Yes. So this scroll that has 7 seals, and it's being slowly opened, and as it's being opened, there's these terrible things that are beginning to occur, which in Matthew 24, that's talking about, well, there's going to be, famines and all these things, and it says it's the beginning of the birth pangs. Yeah, so if I go back to that, let's go back to that really quick. Yep, go back to it. Matthew 24:4. This is when he's answering to them of all the things that are to come, and these are what we believe are the first 5 seals. Maybe the first 4 seals, okay? He says, see to it that no one misleads you. Actually, it'd be the first 4, because he gets on to persecution after this. See to it no one misleads you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will mislead many.
You'll be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened, for those things must take place. But that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs.
Yep.
So he's saying it's not the end yet. He's warning us. These things are bad, but we're not there yet. It's not the end yet.
Right, and that would make sense with what's happening in Revelation. And I would like to point out, too, like, Jesus was answering the disciples' question of, what will be the sign of his coming? What will be the signs of the end of the age? But he wasn't giving them a complete revelation like he was to John.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't giving every single detail. He was just giving them kind of a general outline. So we're not going to see every single detail in his answer in Matthew 24, but man, do we see a lot of correlations there. And it makes me go, well, wait a minute. I've always thought, well, there'd be a pre-trib rapture before anything really happens. I get to leave.
Yeah, before the seals.
Yep. But
what is the fifth seal? Persecution. And what does Jesus say in verse 9 of 24? Then they will deliver you to tribulation. And I know this is really upbeat here, guys, but just hang with us. They will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. At that time many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will rise and will mislead many, because lawlessness is increased. Most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. And then this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come to me. This signifies that, well, if the persecution is the fifth seal, and there's been no disappearing of the people yet to meet the Lord in the clouds, and if these things are just the beginning of the birth pangs, the end is not yet. That means, based on what we're reading, we're not zapped up before the seals start. At least that's how we're reading it, right?
Yeah, and the purpose of really diving into that is because for a lot of Christians, there's this kind of like, I don't really need to be watchful. I don't really need to pay attention to current events. I don't really need to be prepared for hard times because, well, I'm just going to get raptured out of here anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I would wonder if that's really true, then why would Jesus bother to tell us all this stuff?
Right. And he says, he who perseveres to the end will be saved. So, and he's giving us these warnings. Why is he giving us these warnings if they don't apply to us as the church?
I don't know.
And another thing that's important here, because we're basically saying, okay, we don't see the multitude show up till after the sixth seal. And they get their white robes, and then we get on with the seventh seal, and it goes on. And there's actually a lot more to Revelation after that. It sounds like that's it, but then there's a lot more that happens with the Antichrist and all those things. But
so we get so if we are correct, we get out of the worst of it.
Yes.
But we get
and this is an important observation, because we talked about this in Doug Cobb's podcast, that where God has these patterns that we see throughout Scripture related to the number 7. We talked about the 7 days of creation, and we talked about how we're coming up on 7,000 years or 6,000 years of biblical history. Okay, you have 6 seals that, as far as we can tell, based on Matthew 24 and Revelation 6, that we're here for. And on the 7th, before the 7th, we are taken up. So we get to rest. We get to be taken away. And so that pattern fits what we've been already seeing throughout just studying our eschatology here. And so it's still a pre-trib in a sense. Because the end is not yet. That's what he says. Because after the seals, you go into 2 different other sets of judgments. You have the trumpets and the bowls, which are awful. They're kind of similar to the plagues of Egypt and worse. So,
I don't want to be here for those.
No.
And I will say, like, to clarify what I was saying earlier, God has recorded all of the end, because there will be people who are left here later and are, become Christians later, and it's a good guide for them to know what's going to happen.
Right.
So, but what I'm wondering is, if as most believers or as many believers who are, saved now, they're like, well, I don't need to worry about any of this. It's like, but there's this whole entire book here. Maybe we should pay attention to it because, Jesus repeated more than one time that we needed to keep watch, and he's given us things to watch for. And perhaps it's because we will face some hard times, and we need to do some things to, be prepared for them.
That's right.
So let's look at what each one of these seals is, and maybe make some observations of things that we've been noticing.
Let's jump back around and remember, in relation to watching and waiting, I think in Hebrews it also says that we will see the day approaching. Mm-hmm. And then Paul says in is it Timothy or Philippians or Thessalonians? I think it's Thessalonians.
It's one of those books.
I think it's Thessalonians. Well, basically he says, pick your book, but it's Paul, and he says, the whole idea of like, I'll come like a thief in the night, but. And those who are asleep will be taken off guard, but we are not asleep. We should know, like, it won't catch us off guard because we're watching. We see the day approaching. We're like the bridesmaids with their lamps lit. So that's the whole purpose of this podcast, because we're looking around going, I think the day's approaching, guys, and I'm not so sure we're going to get raptured out of here without having to suffer through this.
Yep. And we're not saying we know the exact day or the exact hour.
No one's saying
that. Nope, but we definitely think that we're noticing a season.
That's approaching. Right. Which is something that's being communicated in lots of circles of the Christian community. Mm-hmm. And I think you should, just take note of that. This is not just some pie in the sky wild thing we're pulling out of our pocket. And I think most people, when they're being honest, will look around and go, yeah, it does kind of seem like we're getting near the end, given the amount of chaos and just reading my news feed or my Twitter posts. Wow, this is not good.
Right. All right. So I'm going to read out of mine. We have Bible translation division in our household. I use the NIV, but I use the old NIV. So I'm just going to read this paragraph in mine. Just to review
there's
it.
no division.
And it's just we use different versions.
The old NIV is fine.
So
if it was the new one, we might have to have some division.
Anyway, so back in Revelation 6 verse. It's verse 1. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. So the first rider is a conqueror bent on conquest. And one thing that Kasey and I have talked about before is that in this book, sometimes it's easy to get stuck on, well, it's a rider, so it's got to be one person. But really, it's a personification of the spirit going out. An event. So it doesn't have to be necessarily one person. It can be a group of people as well.
Yeah, and because I think one of the general sort of interpretations, that's the Antichrist. But okay, I don't know that I agree with that. Maybe I could say a spirit of Antichrist, because if we go back to Matthew 24 again, what's he say there? As we, in our text that we were reading from, he said, if we were going to align these together and say, okay, this is comparing to the seals and to what he says there to his disciples. And he says, many will come. See to it that no one misleads you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will mislead many. So that, to me, doesn't sound like an Antichrist, like as a one individual.
Right.
It sounds like multiple individuals who are, speaking in a way that elevates them into a godlike position, something like that.
Yep, it could be like that. It's interesting that this is it says a conqueror bent on conquest, but it's not necessarily war. That's the other thing people, I think, get stuck on in this one. Well, it has to be a war, but that's not what it says. It just says conquest. There's many ways to take over things. I know that during the pandemic, we saw crazy government overreach worldwide. You know?
What do you mean? You can't be political on here.
That's
government overreach. What do you mean?
So, but like that's a form of conquest right there, and it involved no war whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we looked carefully around what's going on, we would see lots of governments and groups
and
having conquest.
And here's another observation. The writer is given authority.
Right.
He's given a crown. He doesn't come with a crown. He's given it. It's given to him. Then he comes forth. He also has a bow. Now, there's no arrows, but, I don't know if that's important, but we know a bow is not a weapon for close combat. This is something where you're firing from far away. So someone with authority that is affecting things from a distance.
Right.
This has been in my trailers. This has been things I've mentioned many times. They are globalists. And the reason why we come back to globalists and frankly, the World Economic Forum.
Because they're crazy.
Because there's such a global aspect to this. And if we get down into Revelation later, way past the chapters we're in here, later toward near the end of the book, it talks about the rise of the Antichrist, a single individual who is coming. He's an anti-Jesus. He's coming as a godlike figure, but he is anti-God. He is anti-Jesus and anti-Christ, and that he is establishing or is given over authority to this global government, global currency. It talks about the mark of the beast. Everyone knows the 666 and everything, and that you cannot buy, sell, or trade without having the mark.
Yeah, that's later.
That's much later, and that's not what we're talking about here. But the World Economic Forum is having an effect and influence on pretty much every nation and dozens of leaders around the world. And right now, all these things we're experiencing with gas prices and food shortages and all of these things, these are orchestrated. They're not just random chance, friends. Okay, this is where we need to be paying attention because they're telling us these things. Okay, the people at the World Economic Forum have been trying to put forth a great reset because they want to save the world. The problem is they're trying to save it from a godless point of view. This is like the Tower of Babel. They're coming together, and nothing will be able to stop them. So they think. So when we read this about this conquest, we're in the middle of conquest right now. That's why all these terrible things are happening, because these people have their hands in the honeypot, if you will, all over the world.
And something to keep in mind is, when I first, back a long time ago, when I first understood about there's these writers in Revelation, for some reason I had in my mind, the first one comes out and does its thing and then it's done. And then the second one comes out and does its thing and then it's done. But that's not what the passage says at all. And
it doesn't say the horse goes away to the stable.
No. And so, this first seal opens of conquest, and it's like, so the conquest begins. It never says that there's any point where the conquest is ending. So, you have your writer that comes out, conquer men on conquest. They're given authority. Well, their authority just continues to accumulate as the other seals are opening. So you might go, well, maybe I see that, okay, but it doesn't seem that bad. It's like, okay, yeah, that's fine, because it's just something that's beginning at this particular time when the seal opens.
Which, we're not necessarily saying the seal has opened.
Yep.
Maybe it has.
Or maybe it will.
Yeah, or maybe we're getting ready for it to open.
We're not necessarily saying that the seal has already opened. It may have opened. It may open in the future.
If the interpretation here is right, that we're not raptured out of here until after the sixth seal, then we can't just assume, it couldn't have started because we would be out of here already. Based on just comparing these two areas of Scripture, nothing supports that here. Now, there may be other areas in the Old Testament, Daniel, where maybe we could draw a case for that. I don't mind that interpretation. That sounds good to me, but I don't know that it's the accurate one.
Right. All right. So, second seal, verse 3, when the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given the power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. I don't know about you, but I have definitely experienced peace being taken from the earth at the moment.
Yes. And this is, if we go back to Matthew, I mean, I think there is definitely an understanding of this is war. I don't know that it's just war.
Nope, because I think if it was just war, it would say war. Because peace being taken from the earth can also be unrest, just general unrest as well.
This is important because what Christ says is you will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened. For those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. And he gets on into some of the later things we'll be talking about. But of course we have seen war. Now you were talking about unrest. Well, war, I mean, obviously Ukraine, Russia, we keep hearing rumors of wars all the time. Is China going to take Taiwan? Are we going to get attacked? Is there going to be a nuclear war? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on right now. Now, it's not necessarily new. There's been rumors of war in the past as well. But, obviously what we're looking at with this is we know that the fulfillment of the Great Commission is near. So what do we see that relates to some of these seals? And Ukraine's a very important one, but let's talk on your unrest first. What were you going to say about that?
Well, it's just that I don't remember a time previously where people seem to hate each other as much as they do now. You can't even have a normal conversation with people, most of the time. You can't civilly disagree.
No.
People have lost that ability where even in the past, at least I'm told in the past, I wasn't there, I don't know. But in the past, it seemed like people could actually have civil disagreement and reason through those kinds of things. And now they'll just be violent instead, or just scream and yell.
And I mean, that goes to all kinds of different avenues. I mean, definitely politically, we see it here and everywhere. And that's the thing. There's such a global aspect to so much of this. And
we're also seeing a lot more just... places you should be able to go to the store or the mall or wherever, a public place, the church, and not worry about having somebody shoot you or something like that.
That's right.
And all around the world, even in countries where countries that have gun control, countries that don't have gun control stuff, they're all experiencing the same kind of unrest and problem, and that to me speaks to peace taken from the earth.
Absolutely. I mean, you see the unrest. It's been going on for quite a number of years now. So that's... And
cities burning down,
Mm-hmm.
But remember the whole thing, what they took over sections of Portland for how long?
Mm-hmm.
During the BLM stuff. So just all sorts of craziness.
I mean, people are being killed in the streets right here all the time. Yeah, and this is one of those things I said to Mandy before, this idea of you can't even have a conversation with someone. You can't sit and reason with them. Come, let us reason together, as the scripture says. You can't do that. People they don't want to have a civil conversation. They don't want to hear your points of evidence. They don't want to have a reasoned conversation. It would be like trying to speak to the mob outside Lot's house and think you were going to get somewhere with a reasoned conversation. You're not going to get anywhere. The only thing that's going to happen is they're going to try and kill you or worse.
Right. Well, and then you also have all the censorship stuff that goes on as well, which I would say relates to peace being taken from the earth because you can't have disagreement. That's a milder form.
Mm-hmm.
That's in there too. But I think that for me, when I was reading this passage, that when I got to the third seal, I was like, oh my.
Mm-hmm.
That was the one that made me go, okay,
Yes.
I think this is going on now.
Yes, because the first two, in some fashion, you could say there's been elements of those that have happened throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some things about this third one with some things going on right now that are so specific. It's hard not to draw some parallels. Now, we could be wrong, absolutely. Our point here is just to make observations.
Yep.
And I don't know that there's been anything quite like this in history where it's aligned so perfectly with what we're reading in the seals.
So,
but, go ahead.
Verse 5 says, "When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, 'Come.' I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 'A quart of wheat for a day's wages, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine.'" So we have inflation.
Yes, and they label this as famine. They get that from what Jesus says. If we go back to Matthew 24, which, famine could certainly be a part of this.
Yes.
Because you're not able to buy enough food, so you're starving.
Yes. But you also have the extremely...
There will be famines and earthquakes, and all these things are made at the beginning of birth pain. So that's where they get the idea of famine.
Yes, but you also have extremely inflated prices. And
yes.
the writers holding scales, like, to weigh out like how you buy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes me go,
Yeah. What's interesting about this is we see that a quart of wheat costs a day's wages. Okay. Now, how much wheat flour usually goes into a loaf of bread? Do you know?
How much wheat flour?
Yeah.
Well, for our loaf of bread, we use 3 cups.
And how many quarts, to a cup?
Well, my handy dandy study Bible here says 1 quart of wheat would be enough for only one person. 3 quarts of the less nutritious barley would be barely enough for a small family. So you would have a quart of wheat for a day's wages. That's enough for one person. A day's wages for one person's amount of food. Or 3 quarts of barley to feed a small family for a day's wages, but the barley wasn't as nutritious. So basically, you're starving. Part of the reason why you're starving is that the price is so inflated. And it doesn't say why the price is so inflated. I know that there's other mention of famine in there. Famine is also mentioned in the 4th seal as well. But it's just very interesting. Not only is this inflation, but it's specifically mentioning wheat and barley. And what did we find out about Ukraine?
So, and this is important, and we may have many different opinions on what's going on in Ukraine, but we need to understand many of these globalists have been in major support of defending Ukraine. This is not to say Russia is good. No. Russia is bad.
And what's going on in Ukraine is not good.
Yes,
That's not good at all.
And yes, what's happening is not good. But we can't be sure what entirely is going on because there's a lot of misinformation, okay? And I'm not going to try and get into the politics of it, but there's unrest. There's some kind of warring going on. The people who we know we can't trust, the World Economic Forum, who are trying to save the world through a godless approach to life, okay? They have invested interest in defending Ukraine. Why? Well, I can't say for sure, but what we can say, and this is important to our observations of the seals and the times we're in. Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe. What's fascinating about the seal and what caught our attention, because it's very specific here. We see inflation, we see famine, starvation, hunger, but it's specifically mentioning wheat and barley. So Ukraine and Russia, and I'll link the website for this information. Ukraine and Russia produce about 1/3 of the wheat traded in global markets and about 1/4 of the world's barley, according to the Washington-based International Food Policy Research Institute. Exports from the two countries, which also include sunflower oil and corn to feed livestock, account for about 12% of total calories traded in the world.
It's a lot of food.
The war could affect at least 3 wheat harvests, is what their agricultural minister said.
Yeah, over in Ukraine. So,
And Russia is not our friend. So you have them controlling a bunch of the world's wheat and barley, grain supply, essentially. And what is this saying? Hey, it's going to cost a day's wages just to get, enough grain to make a loaf of bread.
Right. Now, does that mean the seal's opened yet? I'm not going to say that it does, but I can see the potential for this kind of thing to be going on. I can see wheat, I can see barley, I can see a problem there. I can see inflation coming.
Yes,
with those things.
I mean, in every prediction, every forecast with our economy, with inflation, with the food shortages, is that it's going to get worse. It's why I was urging you to have extra water and food, because we're not only looking at it just from a kind of a political or kind of human standpoint. We're looking through the lens of Revelation and what it's saying. Right.
We also have not just Ukraine and Russia, but just the drought that's been going on in many countries around the world, the crazy wildfires that have been impacting all sorts of harvests.
The drought could be so bad it could create another dust bowl, was what they said recently.
Right, because of that and just not having enough fertilizer. There's all sorts of things, if you watch the news, that are things that are impacting our ability to have enough food. So, which actually leads straight into the fourth seal. So if I look at chapter 6, verse 7, it says, When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, Come. I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given the power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So, of course, we see how famine would be related with what we were just talking about.
I don't think we've had any, taste of pestilence recently.
And, the wild beasts of the earth, a quick Google search will bring up, if you just search wild beast attacks.
Oddly enough.
Will bring up all sorts of increase in that around the world of just different kinds of wild beast attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Yeah, and the thing with the wild animals is we would expect that as there's fires and droughts and these different terrible things going on, it's going to drive them more toward where there's food, and that's where people would be. And I'll list some links in the show notes, but there, if you, like Mandy said, just doing a quick search, there's all kinds of crazy random increases in wild animal attacks. I think a lot of it has to do with the things that have already happened.
Right. And again, we're not saying that this seal has already opened, but we can see how things would be aligning so that it would perhaps happen soon.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Verse 9. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had been maintained. They called out in a loud voice, How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed, as they had been, was to be completed. So...
Yeah, I mean, Christian persecution is definitely increasing. And if you're familiar with the Open Doors ministry, it's about Christian persecution, Christian martyrdom. We even see, just on a small scale, how, there's a rise in persecution against basic biblical truths right here in America. I mean, what is a man? What is a woman? And if you were to speak up against that, you are immediately maligned or called bigoted or cast off of social media or whatever. And so certainly I don't think we have seen the kind of increase of persecution it's talking about here in this seal. But certainly we see an increase of hostility toward Christians, because if you come with the truth and tell people that what they're doing is wrong, and they're in a place where they've been given over, as it says in Romans, to a depraved mind, God gave them over to a depraved mind, it's like trying to reason with the mob outside Lot's house. They're not going to listen. They're not going to have a reasoned, articulate conversation about the finer points of why following the 10 Commandments is worthwhile, and have you considered asking Jesus into your heart? No. Mm-hmm. No, that's not going to happen.
Right. And then, the rest of the chapter, we get to that earthquake again and the people all hiding.
And it looks like a blood moon and a solar eclipse.
Mm-hmm. So then we come back to, well, why does this matter other than, maybe the rapture happens later. What am I supposed to be afraid? And we would say,
no, of
no.
course not. God does not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind.
Right. But it would be wise to take note of these things and to do some preparing,
Mm-hmm.
Preparing your home and your family the best you can for perhaps not having as much food as you're accustomed to,
Mm-hmm.
or not having access to the conveniences that you're accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
But also, preparing yourself with skills that you might need. If you one of my friends asked me, how are you preparing for like what's going on in the world and what do you think's happening next? And I kind of laughed and I told her, well, I'm using a thousands-year-old book to tell me what's happening next.
Mm-hmm.
And she looked at me funny and I'm like, it's Revelation. But if I know that inflation is coming, I can do some things to prepare for that. If I know specifically that it says wheat and barley is going to be a problem, well, then maybe I need to collect some flour. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to be wise in making sure that, to the best of my ability, without going crazy, that I'm prepared for times that are maybe a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, the comforts of Western culture and society have completely dulled our senses. We are such a comfort culture. We are so, frankly, we idolize convenience. And we don't know how to deal with those things going away. Like that just, what do you mean? Like I can't go to McDonald's and get my Happy Meal? What do you mean I can't just, watch what I want on TV and not worry about the power being cut out, or having enough water, or having enough, like we've taken for granted these things, these freedoms that we have here, specifically in America and some other Western culture countries. Mm-hmm. But if we're going to be prepared, and we can see through the scripture here, the great multitude doesn't show up until after the sixth seal, then there is good cause for us to maybe take these warnings a little more seriously. That when Jesus says, he who perseveres to the end will be saved, why would he say that?
Because we have to actually persevere through something.
And, well, maybe that's just for the people who are left behind, maybe.
That would be nice.
But I'm not convinced based on what the scriptures are saying. Like, again, if we just compare Revelation to Matthew 24 and just look at it, and we see a very similar pattern in both books, and we see what's going on in the world very much aligning with what we see in the seals, or certainly building up toward an even worse amount of these things, whether it be inflation, famine, wild beast attacks, natural disturbances. And we're hearing a lot about climate change, and there's a climate emergency, and I've talked about this before. These are the increasing birth pangs. No man or men or group of men or women can save the planet through their godless pursuits. There is only one who can come and make all things new, that is Jesus Christ. And that is who we need to be looking for and keeping our hope in, because he is the one who's going to allow us to persevere.
Speaking of that, I would say it's also wise to be preparing not only my physical for my physical needs, but also for my spiritual needs.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
keeping your lamp lit.
It can be easy to rely, with that kind of comfort culture in mind, it can be easy to rely on other people to just give me my spiritual food, and
mm-hmm.
other people to do all the heavy spiritual lifting for me. But I need to be able for myself to really dive into the scriptures, to really read it for myself, to have a strong prayer life,
yes.
mm-hmm.
like,
because that's going to be able to sustain me through harder times.
Yes, that's right. We've come to rely on others to get us through hard times, the government, or a stimulus check, or, there'll just always be enough food at the store. I can just order it online. Or what if you can't?
Or like, in the case of, if you have children, well, the church will always be there to disciple my kids, or that, but what if it's not, or what if things are more difficult?
Yeah, what if this church is scattered?
And you need to be able to disciple your child. Like, people need to know how to do that. We need to be able to start helping our children more at home and not relying just on church to do those things for us. So there's a lot of preparing, just knowing that if I know that hard times are coming, I need to be able to prepare myself, my physically, but also spiritually, to make it through those difficulties. So it would involve sitting down and taking inventory of, okay, what are my physical needs? How am I planning on meeting those in a reasonable way? Not going crazy. Because there's only a certain number of things I can do, and then, I have to rely on God to meet the needs. I've only got so much storage space and all, but still, certain number of things I can do there. But also my spiritual needs and what are those, and what areas am I weak in, and I need to figure that out as well, because the time is short.
Well, that's a good point. I think there's an attitude in church. Maybe it comes from the pre-trib, if you will, view. Because I would say this is still a pre-trib view. That what we're discussing here today, if we want to just get into the technicalities here, he says the end is not yet. These are the beginning of birth pangs, and then the end comes once people are raptured up. And so, you could say maybe that the seventh seal is really the beginning of, like, the end, and progressing that.
Well, that would make sense, because it's like, it's like a letter. Your letter's not opened and ready to be read until the envelope is open. Right? So in the same way, the judgment is not ready to happen until the envelope or the seals are opened. It's kind of the same.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. One final thing I'll say, and this is later in the book of Revelation, and I talked about it earlier, but we see this globalist movement of all these different countries coming together, and there's something kind of at first blush that seems like, oh, that's so good, and we're all in this together. Like, we think about the pandemic, and we're all coming together, but we got to remember that the story of Babel, when godless men and women come together to solve their problems, God does not see that as a good thing. He had to confuse their languages and disperse them across the globe. And there's multiple reasons to that. One of them was they were supposed to have done that already, and they were disobedient, but they were thinking they were as great as God. They could reach to the heavens. And here we see all these globalists coming together, and you have one of these guys, the Israeli doctor, who I can't pronounce his name. He's a very scary dude, but he calls the resurrection of Christ fake news. This is one of the globalists, friends. Okay, but and then Bill Gates, he's part of the globalist elites as well, and he's been pushing all this vaccine stuff for years, and he's had a heavy hand in all the stuff with the vaccines during the pandemic. And whatever you think of them and their efficacy and all of that, put that aside here. What did we see that nearly came to fruition during the pandemic? A vaccine passport. And it would have been a major roadblock to being able to buy or sell, to go to a place and use your money, whether it's the store or a restaurant or a movie theater, whatever. This is something they nearly implemented, okay? Now, I'm not saying the vaccines are the mark of the beast, but I am saying we see that globally, this nearly happened, where everyone, not everyone, of course, but many people around the earth have taken this vaccine, and many countries have put out some kind of vaccine passport sort of system, and certainly the infrastructure is in place for that. so to speak. So just looking at that and comparing to what we know in Revelation, where whoever doesn't have this mark can't buy or sell. That's almost the same thing. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility as we continue to look at Revelation and what's going on in the world to say, yeah, things are looking really late in the hour. This is why it's so important to be prepared. Because the reason Jesus gave us these warnings was not so we could just be like, oh, that's interesting. It may require more of us than we are expecting it will. And one thing we know Jesus has promised is that we will suffer. And he calls us to pick up our cross daily and follow after him. We need to be preparing in our hearts and our minds for increasing persecution and difficulty in life. And not just expect that things are always going to go well. And that's a little sobering, but there's a reason he gives us these warnings. He says, don't lose heart. And that is why he's put these things down here. Because they must take place in order for the end to come. So with that in mind, be on the alert.
Yep.
Be on the alert, dear Christian, because the hour is late. Until next time.
God bless.
You have been listening to This Late Hour. Your contribution helps pay our fees, improve our equipment, and build better content. It is my hope that your continued support of our show may bring future interviews and exclusives. Our goal is to always be improving our show so that the church may be strengthened in our mission to bring salt and light to this present darkness. May God richly bless you.